The November rain didn't just fall, it clawed at the city, turning the asphalt streets into black, shimmering rivers that bled neon light. For Camilla Marino, each cold drop felt like a personal taunt. The last bus had already gone, its taillights two red gashes that vanished into the night, taking with them her last sliver of hope for an easy end to the day. A curse escaped her lips, a small puff of white vapor instantly devoured by the frigid air. Her thin jacket, soaked through hours ago, clung to her worn-out waitress uniform. Her phone had died 3 blocks back, leaving her stranded in an unfamiliar part of the city, a place where the shadows in the alleyways seemed to breathe. The tips from her double shift, a crumpled, damp collection of dollar bills in her pocket, were just enough to cover this month's rent. But the medical bills for her grandmother, they were a different storm cloud entirely, a dark, looming mass that threatened to wash away the fragile stability she fought so hard to build. The shortcut through the narrow alley seemed like a bad idea, born of desperation. The air inside was thick with the scent of wet garbage and decay, and the brick walls seemed to whisper forgotten sorrows. Camilla ducked under a rusting fire escape, seeking a moment's reprieve from the downpour, when a sound stopped her. It was faint, a weak whimper, but it was unmistakably human. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of warning. She had been taught her whole life to walk away, to keep her head down, to not invite trouble. Trouble was a luxury she couldn't afford. But that sound, it snagged on her conscience. Behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets, she found him. A boy, no older than 7 or 8, was curled into a tight, shivering ball. His expensive clothes were soaked through, a stark contrast to the grime around him. His small body trembled violently with a fever she recognized in an instant. His eyes, glassy with delirium, widened with stark terror when he saw her. Instinctively, Camilla raised her hands, making herself appear smaller, less threatening. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the relentless patter of the rain. The boy didn't respond, just stared at her with enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold a universe of fear. Camilla's mind raced through the possibilities: lost, kidnapped, abandoned. None of them were good explanations for a well-dressed child alone in an alley during a thunderstorm. "I'm Camilla," she tried again, crouching down slowly, the cold concrete seeping through her jeans. "Can you tell me your name?" His lips trembled, but no sound came out. His skin, even in the dim, erratic light, looked frighteningly pale against his dark hair. The responsible thing to do was call the police, but her dead phone made that impossible. The nearest hospital was over 20 blocks away, a 4-mile walk, and no taxi would ever stop in this neighborhood after dark. In that moment, chilled to the bone and utterly exhausted, Camilla Marino made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of her destiny. "I live just a few streets from here," she said slowly, her voice a soft anchor in the storm. She shrugged off her own jacket, ignoring the immediate, biting cold. "I'm going to take you somewhere warm, get you dry, and then we can figure things out, okay?" She draped the jacket over his small shoulders. When she reached out to touch him, the boy flinched, but didn't pull away. His skin burned against her fingers, confirming what she already knew. His fever was dangerously high, gathering him into her arms. She was surprised by how little he weighed, a fragile weight against her chest. The walk to her tiny apartment felt endless, the boy's fevered body growing heavier with each step. Camilla whispered reassurances she wasn't entirely sure were true. "You're going to be okay. I've got you. You're safe now." By the time she fumbled with her keys at her apartment door, the boy had stopped shivering and had fallen unnervingly still in her arms. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. She laid him gently on her worn sofa, her hands already reaching for the medicine cabinet, completely unaware that her simple act of kindness had just placed her directly in the crosshairs of the city's most powerful and ruthless man. The thermometer read 104°F, alarmingly high. Camilla worked with a methodical calm she didn't feel, stripping off his wet, expensive clothes and wrapping him in her softest blankets. Years of caring for her ailing grandmother had taught her the basics of nursing. She crushed a children's acetaminophen tablet into a spoonful of applesauce, gently lifting his head so he could swallow. His clothes lay in a soggy pile on her floor, a cashmere sweater, tailored trousers, and Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They were a testament to a world utterly alien to her own. Throughout the night, a silence stretching between the groaning pipes of her old building and the erratic rhythm of the rain outside, Camilla sat vigil. She placed cool compresses on his forehead, changing them when they grew warm from his fever. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words she couldn't understand, his small hand gripping her sleeve with surprising strength. Around 3 a.m., his eyes suddenly opened with startling clarity. "Papa will be angry," he whispered, the first coherent sentence he'd spoken. His voice was a thin, reedy thread of sound. "They took me from the car, said they'd hurt him if I made noise." Camilla's blood ran cold. The word "they" hung in the air, heavy with menace. "Who took you?" she asked gently, trying to keep the alarm from her voice. The boy's eyes filled with tears before he slipped back into a fevered sleep, leaving her question unanswered in the dimly lit room. Dawn was breaking when his fever finally broke. The gray morning light filtered through her drafty windows. Camilla had nodded off in the armchair beside him, waking to find a pair of deep brown eyes studying her intently. "You helped me," he stated simply, his voice stronger than before. "I'm Lucas," he offered without prompting, sitting up slightly against the pillows. His accent was faint but unmistakable, suggesting an education far more refined than the public school system Camilla had navigated. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her dizzy. "I'm Camilla. How are you feeling?" She reached out to check his forehead, noting with satisfaction that his skin felt much cooler to the touch. Lucas looked around her modest apartment with undisguised curiosity. The mismatched furniture, the nursing textbooks stacked on the coffee table, the single-framed photo of her smiling grandmother. "This isn't like my house," he observed. A simple statement of fact, not judgment. Before Camilla could respond, a sound from outside seized her attention. The deep thrum of powerful car engines, multiple, stopping directly in front of her building. Lucas tensed immediately, his eyes widening with a mixture of relief and fear. Camilla moved to the window, pulling back the thin curtain just enough to see the street below. 3 black SUVs, with windows so tinted they looked like obsidian, were parked haphazardly. Blocking the entire road, men in dark tailored suits emerged, moving with a chilling military precision. The last man to exit the center vehicle wore no tactical gear, just an impeccably tailored suit that, even from 3 floors up, screamed wealth and power. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he surveyed the dilapidated building. And in that gut-wrenching moment, Camilla knew with absolute terrifying certainty that Lucas's father had arrived to reclaim what was his. Heavy, purposeful footsteps echoed up the worn stairwell. She glanced at Lucas, who had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on the door. "That's my papa," he whispered, his voice a strange mix of awe and apprehension. Before Camilla could process anything, 3 sharp, authoritative knocks rattled her apartment door. She approached it cautiously, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, acutely aware of how this must look. A struggling waitress with a wealthy, kidnapped child in her rundown apartment. With trembling fingers, she turned the lock. The door swung open to reveal the man from the street, flanked by 2 imposing figures whose eyes scanned her and her apartment with a practiced, predatory efficiency. The man's dark eyes, the color of black coffee and secrets, swept past her, instantly locating Lucas on the sofa. "Papa," Lucas called out, his voice stronger than it had been all night. The man's severe expression transformed, the mask of control cracking to reveal a wave of profound relief. He strode past Camilla without a second glance, kneeling beside his son. "Lucas," he breathed, cupping the boy's face with large hands that looked capable of both exquisite tenderness and brutal violence. Camilla stood awkwardly by the door as the 2 guards silently, methodically, cleared her small apartment. One nodded almost imperceptibly to the father, a silent confirmation that the space contained no immediate threats. "You took my son," the man said finally, turning to face her. His voice was deceptively soft, a low rumble with a dangerous current running beneath it. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy and ripe with implied consequences. Fear gave way to a surge of indignation. "I found your son," she corrected, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "In an alley during a storm with a fever of 104 degrees. I brought him here because my phone was dead, and he needed immediate help. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite belief, but a willingness to consider. His gaze moved from her defiant face to the makeshift sickbed she'd created, the bottle of children's medicine on the table, the bowl of water with a washcloth beside it, the soft blankets cocooning his son. "She made the fever go away, Papa," Lucas interjected, his small voice somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "She stayed awake all night to make me better." The father's gaze returned to Camilla, more calculating now. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone flat, as if her answer might determine whether she lived or died. The air in the small apartment thickened, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. "Camilla Marino Shintaki," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm a waitress and a nursing student. I did what anyone with basic human decency would do for a sick child. Now, who are you, and why was your son alone in an alley?" His eyebrows rose fractionally. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe even a sliver of respect at her audacity. "Vincenzo Morelli," he replied after a taut pause. The name meant nothing to her, but the way his men stood, the sheer force of his presence, told her it should. "And while I appreciate your assistance, Miss Marino, you should understand that involving yourself with my family comes with complications." Camilla watched as Vincenzo lifted his son into his arms with surprising gentleness. Lucas's head rested against his father's shoulder, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion despite the drama unfolding around him. "Your son mentioned people taking him from a car," Camilla said, keeping her voice low but firm. "He may have been drugged. He needs a hospital, not just fever reducers." Vincenzo's expression hardened, but he nodded to one of his men, who immediately stepped outside, speaking quietly into a phone. "A doctor is already en route to my residence," Vincenzo explained, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Lucas will receive the best care available." As Camilla gathered Lucas's now dry clothes, she noticed Vincenzo's eyes tracking her every movement. The expensive fabric felt foreign in her hands, a tangible reminder of the vast, dangerous gulf between their worlds. "You seem to genuinely care for my son's welfare," Vincenzo observed, his tone impossible to read. "That's rare. Most people see Lucas only as leverage." Camilla handed over the small bundle of clothing. "I don't know what world you live in, Mr. Morelli, but in mine, children aren't leverage." She met his intense gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he spoke. "In my world, Miss Marino, everything and everyone has a price." He nodded to his other man, who produced a thick, white envelope and placed it on her coffee table. "Consider this compensation for your trouble." Camilla didn't even glance at the envelope. Her pride, fierce and unyielding, was all she had left. "I didn't help your son for money. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The words hung in the air, a simple, defiant truth in the face of his overwhelming wealth and power. Another long, silent moment passed as Vincenzo studied her, his dark eyes seeming to peel back her layers, to see the exhaustion and the desperation she tried so hard to hide. "Then perhaps," he said slowly, the calculating mask settling back onto his features, "there is something else you want. Your apartment suggests financial struggles. Your textbooks suggest ambition. Lucas has grown attached to you." Camilla's heart raced. She knew this was a precipice, a turning point. "What exactly are you offering?" she asked, her voice steady despite the dangerous territory she was entering. "My son needs a private nurse during his recovery, someone he trusts," Vincenzo said, his eyes never leaving her face. "Someone with medical knowledge who has already proven she can remain calm in a crisis. $5,000 a week. Plus room and board at my estate." The figure struck her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It was more than enough. Enough to cover her grandmother's treatments, her tuition, everything. It was a lifeline, but the rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her safe all these years, screamed warnings. A gilded cage is still a cage, and men like Vincenzo Morelli didn't just offer lifelines. They offered chains, wrapped in silk and tied with promises that were beautiful and breakable. The Morelli estate materialized from the morning mist like a fortress, a sprawling stone behemoth that commanded the landscape. As their convoy of black SUVs approached, wrought iron gates taller than two men swung open silently, their movement tracked by the unblinking eyes of security cameras. Camilla sat rigid in the back seat of the lead vehicle, her single worn duffel bag a pathetic testament to the life she was leaving behind. The 1-month contract she'd signed, its ink barely dry, bore a figure that still made her head spin, enough to erase her grandmother's medical debt completely. It was a deal with the devil, and she had signed it with her eyes wide open. They pulled into a circular driveway surrounding an ornate fountain. The mansion was a sprawling structure of granite and glass, a modern castle that looked more like a corporate headquarters for a small nation than a home. Men with discreet earpieces patrolled the perimeter, their vigilance suggesting dangers far beyond the threat of common burglary. Vincenzo had said little during the drive, his attention divided between hushed, intense phone conversations in Italian and checking on Lucas, who had fallen asleep peacefully against Camilla's shoulder. The boy had refused to let go of her hand when they'd left her apartment, a small, trusting gesture that had sealed Vincenzo's unusual job offer. He had seen his son's trust in her and had decided to purchase it. Inside, the mansion's opulence was jarring. Soaring ceilings, marble floors that echoed their footsteps, and vast windows that looked out onto meticulously manicured grounds. Yet, it was an opulence tempered by an undercurrent of cold functionality. Camilla noted security keypads beside ornate door frames and the subtle placement of cameras amid crystal chandeliers. This was a beautiful cage, designed to keep threats out, or perhaps to keep its occupants in. A woman in a crisp gray uniform appeared, her face a stoic mask. She introduced herself as Mrs. Alvarez, the housekeeper. Her eyes, holding a mixture of curiosity and weary resignation, assessed Camilla in a single sweeping glance. She had clearly seen many people come and go from this house, and wondered what role this plainly dressed newcomer would play in the household hierarchy. "Lucas's room is this way," Mrs. Alvarez said, her voice devoid of warmth. "The doctor is waiting to examine him." Vincenzo carried his sleeping son up a grand sweeping staircase. His movements were so careful, so deliberate. It was as if he carried something made of precious glass rather than a child. In these moments, the formidable, intimidating Mr. Morelli vanished, replaced by a father, his love for his son, a raw, tangible thing. The boy's bedroom was the size of Camilla's entire apartment. It looked like it had been plucked from a luxury department store catalog. Too perfect, too untouched. Only a scattered collection of detailed dinosaur figurines on a shelf suggested a child actually lived there, rather than just existed within the pristine space. A distinguished silver-haired man waited inside, his medical bag already open on a side table. "Dr. Whitaker," Vincenzo acknowledged with a nod. "This is Camilla Marino, Lucas's new nurse." The title still felt foreign, an ill-fitting costume for an identity she hadn't possessed 12 hours ago. The doctor's examination was thorough, confirming Camilla's amateur diagnosis: exhaustion and a high fever, likely exacerbated by exposure. Dr. Whitaker spoke in hushed tones about blood tests and careful monitoring, phrases that made Vincenzo's jaw tighten with barely controlled rage. After the doctor left, Vincenzo lingered in the doorway of Lucas's room, watching as Camilla arranged the prescribed medications on the bedside table. "You should know," he said quietly, his voice pulling her from her task. "The people who took my son are not finished. By helping him, you have placed yourself in their sights." Camilla's hands stilled, the small plastic bottles suddenly feeling heavy. The full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She wasn't just a nurse in a mansion. She was a pawn in a dangerous game, a game whose rules she didn't understand, and whose other players would see her as nothing more than a new, expendable piece on the board. The first few days at the Morelli estate passed in a blur of structured routine. Camilla's world shrank to the confines of Lucas's suite of rooms. The boy's fever subsided, but he remained unusually quiet, a shadow of the chattering, curious child she sensed he was underneath. He spoke only when directly addressed, except with her. When they were alone, he would whisper stories about his dinosaurs and ask endless questions about her life, a life so starkly different from his own. One afternoon, while Lucas napped, Camilla stood by the vast window in his room, looking down at the gardens. She noticed Ramon, Vincenzo's head of security, speaking intently with another guard. Their eyes continually darted up to her window, a constant, unnerving vigilance that made her skin prickle with unease. They weren't just protecting the estate. They were watching for a specific threat aimed directly at the boy she was charged with protecting. Later, while organizing Lucas's medications in the estate's cavernous, stainless steel kitchen, she overheard a heated conversation from Vincenzo's study down the hall. He was speaking Italian, a language she'd studied in college to better understand her own heritage, a fact she had never mentioned to her new employer. The words traditore, interno, and informatore made her freeze. A traitor, inside, an informant. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Someone inside this fortress was feeding information to Vincenzo's enemies. It explained the heightened security, the constant surveillance, and Vincenzo's increasingly guarded, volatile demeanor. That evening, she was summoned to his study. The room was the heart of his empire, a space of dark leather, polished mahogany, and the faint lingering scent of expensive cigars and old books. Vincenzo sat behind a massive desk, his presence filling the room. On the wall behind him, discreetly embedded in the wood paneling, were a series of surveillance monitors showing various angles of the estate grounds. "How much do you know about what I do, Miss Marino?" Vincenzo asked without preamble. His fingers traced the edge of a manila folder on his desk, a folder that, she suspected, contained every detail of her life. Camilla chose her answer carefully. "You're wealthy, powerful, and someone tried to use your son to get to you," she replied evenly. "Beyond that, I focused on my job, which is Lucas's health, not my employer's business interests." A ghost of a smile touched Vincenzo's lips. "Diplomatic," he acknowledged. "The truth is both simpler and more complicated. I control a significant portion of the city's commerce, both legitimate and otherwise. Recently, I acquired assets that others believe should be theirs." He slid a photograph across the polished surface of the desk. It was of her and Lucas, playing in the garden the previous afternoon. The angle was wrong. It had been taken from a distance, from outside the property walls, beyond the security perimeter Vincenzo had assured her was impenetrable. "The Navarro family, Val," he continued, his voice deceptively calm, "believes that by taking Lucas, they can force me to relinquish those assets. They have been watching this estate, cataloging routines, identifying potential weaknesses." He tapped a manicured finger on her image in the photograph. "Including you." Camilla stared at the photo, a chill spreading through her chest. Her eyes caught something she hadn't noticed at first. A tiny, faint red dot, almost invisible. Centered on Lucas's chest, a laser sight from a high-powered rifle. It wasn't an attempted assassination, it was a message. "We can reach you anytime. We can touch what you love." "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She pushed the photograph back across the desk, suddenly desperate to break physical contact with the evidence of how close Lucas had come to harm under her watch. "Because tomorrow Lucas has a follow-up appointment with a specialist that cannot be postponed," Vincenzo replied, his expression grave. "And despite my security team's recommendations, he refuses to go without you. I need you to understand the risk you are taking." She thought of Lucas's small hand in hers, his whispered confidences, the absolute trust he'd placed in her when he had no reason to trust anyone. She thought of her grandmother, safe in a state-of-the-art facility because of this man's money. She was already in this world. There was no going back. "I won't let him go alone," she said, her voice firm, the fear crystallizing into resolve. "Tell me exactly what I need to do." The trip to the specialist's office was a masterclass in controlled paranoia. The route had been mapped and remapped. Security teams were positioned at key intersections. The timing was precise to the second. Camilla sat in the back of the armored SUV, the interior smelling of rich leather and the faint metallic scent of security. Lucas sat beside her, his small body tense despite his excitement about finally leaving the estate after nearly a week of confinement. "Will the doctor hurt me?" he whispered, his eyes wide as he clutched a dinosaur figurine. It was a triceratops, which Camilla had learned was named Commander Spike, his most treasured possession and constant companion. Camilla squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Dr. Winters just needs to check your blood to make sure you're all better," she explained, keeping her voice light. "It might pinch for a second, but I'll be right there the whole time." She felt Vincenzo's eyes on her from the seat opposite. He had been watching her, a silent, intense observation since she'd agreed to come. The medical building looked aggressively ordinary, a deliberate choice to avoid drawing attention. But Camilla, now trained to see the world through a lens of suspicion, noticed the subtle security presence. Men in suits pretending to read newspapers in the lobby, others positioned strategically near exits. It was a silent, invisible web of protection. As they waited in the private examination room, Camilla's gaze drifted to the window. She noticed a nondescript delivery van parked across the street. It had been there since their arrival, its driver nowhere to be seen. A flicker of unease went through her. She made a mental note to mention it to Ramon, remembering his briefing. Identify patterns. Trust your instincts. The smallest detail can be the one that saves a life. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was her grandmother asking how her new live-in nursing job was going. The simple message created a pang of longing for the normal life she'd left behind. A world where suspicious vans were just vans and children weren't targets. The doctor's explanation of Lucas's improved blood work faded into background noise as Camilla spotted a reflection in the glass of a medical supply cabinet. It was the driver from the van. He was inside the building now, speaking intently with a security guard who wasn't part of Vincenzo's team. Her heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She casually moved, shifting her position to block Lucas from the doorway's line of sight. Her hand, hidden in her pocket, found the small, smooth surface of the emergency button Vincenzo had insisted she carry, a device designed to silently alert his security team to a threat. In the examination room, Lucas sat bravely as the phlebotomist drew a small blood sample. "You're doing great," Camilla encouraged. Holding his free hand while keeping her body positioned between him and the window, just as Ramon had instructed. The attack came not from the outside, as they had all expected, but from within. A nurse Camilla hadn't seen before entered with a tray of supplies. Her movements were too precise, her smile too fixed, her eyes too calculating. The name tag, Jessica, seemed fake. Camilla recognized the threat a split second before anyone else. As the woman reached for something hidden beneath a sterile cloth on her tray, Camilla lunged. She slammed into the false nurse, knocking them both to the floor in a clatter of metal instruments. A syringe filled with a clear liquid skittered across the tile. The woman recovered with shocking speed, her facade of medical professionalism vanishing. She struck Camilla hard across the jaw with a trained, brutal precision. Stars exploded behind Camilla's eyes, but adrenaline, raw and potent, surged through her. She grabbed the woman's wrists, her nursing student's knowledge of anatomy giving her an unexpected advantage as she dug her thumbs into the pressure points. "Lucas, under the table, now!" she shouted, using every ounce of her strength to keep the attacker pinned. The door burst open and Vincenzo and Ramon rushed in, their faces grim, alerted by her silent panic button. The would-be kidnapper twisted violently in Camilla's grip, a surge of desperate strength. She broke free and lunged, not for the door, but toward the examination table where Lucas's terrified face was visible. Without a second of hesitation, Camilla threw herself into the attacker's path. The impact of the woman's steel-toed boot sent a lance of pure agony through her ribs, but she had accomplished her goal. She had bought them seconds. It was all the time Ramon needed. The takedown was swift, silent, and brutally efficient. In the chaotic aftermath, Camilla found herself on the floor, cradling a sobbing Lucas, murmuring reassurances despite the fire in her side. "You're safe. Shh, you're safe," she repeated, her voice shaking. She met Vincenzo's gaze over his son's head. His expression was a terrifying, complex mixture of white-hot fury, profound relief, and something that looked remarkably like awe. The ride back to the estate passed in a tense, ringing silence, broken only by Lucas's occasional sniffles. Camilla winced as the SUV hit a pothole, the pain in her ribs flaring sharply. Vincenzo noticed immediately, his observant eyes missing nothing. "You're injured," he stated. It wasn't a question, but a realization tinged with a heavy, unfamiliar emotion that might have been guilt. The estate doctor confirmed 3 bruised ribs and a mild concussion. The injuries would heal, but they required rest. Camilla found herself installed in a guest suite near Lucas's room, her protests about being fine overruled by both father and son. "You saved my life, again," Lucas said, solemnly from her bedside that evening. He carefully placed Commander Spike on her nightstand. "He'll protect you while you sleep." The gesture, so childlike and earnest, brought unexpected tears to Camilla's eyes. Vincenzo began visiting each evening after Lucas was asleep. He would sit in the armchair by her bed, his usual commanding presence softened in the dim lamplight, and give her updates on the investigation. The woman was a professional hired by the Navarro family. The plan had been sophisticated, designed to separate Lucas from his protectors in the controlled environment of the medical office. "You were never supposed to be in this position," Vincenzo said on the third night, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Your job was to care for him, not to place yourself between him and harm." "It's the same job," she whispered, her ribs aching with each breath. During her recovery, the household's perception of her shifted. Mrs. Alvarez, the stoic housekeeper, arrived one afternoon with a leather-bound photo album. "He hasn't looked at these since his mother passed," she confided, her voice thick with emotion, "but he asked for them yesterday. Said he wanted to show you." Flipping through the pages with Lucas, seeing the woman with his same dark eyes and warm smile, Camila felt the walls around her own heart begin to crumble. She wasn't just an employee anymore. News from the outside world was carefully filtered. Vincenzo informed her that he had arranged for her grandmother to receive specialized care at an exclusive medical facility, explaining it away as a health care grant from a charitable foundation he controlled. He had taken her greatest vulnerability and shielded it, weaving her deeper into his world. One day, exploring a wing of the mansion she hadn't seen, she discovered a vast library. Tucked away in an alcove were shelves filled with the latest medical textbooks and nursing journals. It was his silent acknowledgement of her interrupted education, a quiet promise that her dreams weren't forgotten within these protected walls. The first time Lucas called her Mila instead of Miss Marino, she felt a fundamental shift. She was no longer just performing a service. She was becoming part of the fragile, broken heart of this strange, dangerous household. "I don't regret it," she said to Vincenzo one evening, her voice stronger now, her body slowly healing. "Lucas is a child. He deserves to be protected, regardless of the world he was born into." The simple truth of her words hung between them, transcending their vastly different circumstances. Vincenzo studied her with an intensity that would have made her uncomfortable weeks ago, but now felt familiar, grounding. "Your contract ends in 3 days," he observed, his tone deliberately neutral. "I assume you will be eager to return to your previous life." Camilla thought about her empty apartment, the constant hum of the old refrigerator, the loneliness. She thought of her waitressing job, the endless cycle of exhaustion and financial anxiety. Then she thought of Lucas's nightmares that only she could soothe, and his gradual, blossoming return to the chattering, curious child he must have been before trauma silenced him. "Lucas needs stability," she said carefully, her gaze unwavering. "He's been through too much change already." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "And I think you could use someone in your life who isn't afraid to tell you the truth." Something flickered in Vincenzo's dark eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition. "And what truth is that, Camilla?" he asked, using her first name for the first time. "That your business, whatever it is, creates enemies who see your son as leverage, not as a child," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That he needs more than bodyguards and armored cars. He needs normalcy. He needs routine. He needs someone who cares about him as a person, not as an heir." Vincenzo didn't speak for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken thoughts. "And you believe you can provide that?" he finally asked. The question contained layers of meaning she wasn't sure she was ready to explore. "I know I can give him consistency and care," she answered honestly. "The question is whether you're willing to let someone into your world who won't simply follow orders, someone who will challenge you when it's about his well-being." A slow, tired smile spread across Vincenzo's face, transforming his usually stern features. It was a smile that reached his eyes, warming them from the inside out. "I am offering you a permanent position, Camilla," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "Not just as Lucas's nurse, but as his guardian, for when my business takes me away, a partner in ensuring his safety and his happiness." Her breath caught. The implications of his words, guardian, partner, were immense. "That sounds like more than employment," she observed, her voice barely a whisper. The air between them seemed to crackle with a new potent energy. Vincenzo reached out, his large, warm hand covering hers, where it rested on the arm of the chair. The touch was gentle, yet it sent an electric jolt through her. "I have built my empire on calculated risks," he said quietly, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "But inviting you into our lives, that was the first decision I've made based solely on trust, rather than strategy." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "Stay, Camilla, we need you." It wasn't a command, it was a plea. And in that moment, she knew she was no longer on a precipice. She had already fallen. The decision to stay was one thing. Navigating the reality of it was another entirely. Camilla's world, once defined by the scent of antiseptic hospital hallways and the clatter of cheap diner plates, was now a silent, sprawling landscape of polished marble, hushed footsteps, and the constant, unnerving presence of men with guns hidden beneath their tailored jackets. The gilded cage had closed its door, and she was inside. Her role quickly evolved beyond that of a simple nurse. She became the gatekeeper to Lucas's world, a soft but unyielding buffer between the boy's fragile recovery and the cold, hard necessities of Vincenzo's empire. She clashed, quietly but firmly, with Ramon's rigid security protocols. "He can't spend his entire childhood indoors, Ramon," she argued one crisp autumn afternoon, finding the head of security watching as Lucas listlessly pushed a toy car across the Persian rug in his room. "He needs fresh air, sunshine. He needs to feel like a boy, not a prisoner." Ramon's face, a roadmap of old scars and unwavering loyalty, was impassive. "My orders are to minimize risk. The grounds are secure, but the open sky is a variable I can't control." "Then we control the variables," she countered, her voice gaining a confidence that surprised even herself. "There's a walled garden behind the west wing. It's completely enclosed. We can have 2 men on the walls and 2 at the entrance. He can have 1 hour, just 1 hour, to feel the grass under his feet." Ramon studied her, his dark eyes weighing her words. He had seen her throw herself in front of a bullet, metaphorically speaking, for the boy. Her fierce devotion was not in question. He gave a single curt nod. 1 hour. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. That afternoon, as Lucas laughed, his face tilted up to the sun while he chased a butterfly, Camilla saw Vincenzo watching them from a high window. He didn't wave or smile, but his presence was a tangible thing, an intense, focused observation that sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't just watching his son, he was watching her change the dynamics of his carefully controlled world. The nights became their own territory. After Lucas was asleep, a profound silence would settle over the mansion. It was in these quiet, stretching hours that Vincenzo would often find her in the vast 2-story library. She would be curled in a deep leather armchair, one of her nursing textbooks open in her lap, but her eyes lost in thought. "You read about saving lives," he said one night, his voice a low rumble from the shadows as he entered, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "An optimistic profession." "It's a hopeful one," she corrected softly, not looking up. "It's based on the belief that things can be fixed, that damage isn't always permanent." "A belief I have never been able to afford," he replied, moving to stand before the unlit fireplace. The firelight was absent, but he seemed to draw his own heat from the darkness. Their conversations were a careful dance, a slow, deliberate peeling back of layers. She learned of his childhood, a brutal education in power and survival after his own father's untimely death. He spoke of Lucas's mother, Isabella, not with grief, but with a kind of weary sadness, a woman who had loved the man, but couldn't endure the world he inhabited. He, in turn, learned of her quiet, relentless struggles, the weight of her grandmother's illness, the fierce, burning ambition to heal others that drove her through double shifts and sleepless nights of study. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his intense gaze making her feel as though he were seeing not just the woman she was, but the woman she had the potential to become. One evening, as she was recounting a funny story about a particularly difficult patient from her clinical rotations, he let out a low chuckle. The sound was so unexpected, so out of place in the grim tapestry of his life, that it made her stop mid-sentence. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, rare thing that transformed his harsh features into something dangerously handsome. "You are a rare creature, Camilla Marino," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. You walk into the heart of the storm and complain about the lack of sunshine. His proximity, the warmth radiating from him, the scent of sandalwood and something uniquely his own, filled the space between them. Her heart raced, a frantic, panicked beat that had nothing to do with fear. This was a different kind of danger, a more insidious one. It was Lucas, in his childlike innocence, who brought the brewing storm to a head. He was sitting on her bed one afternoon, watching her get ready for dinner, a new ritual he insisted upon. Her simple life of jeans and worn-out sweaters had been replaced by a wardrobe of elegant, understated clothing that Mrs. Alvarez had procured for her on Vincenzo's orders. As she fastened a simple silver chain around her neck, Lucas's small fingers reached out to touch the object that rested at its end. It was a locket, own and tarnished silver, intricately engraved with a single unique flower, a black orchid. It's pretty, Lucas whispered. Who gave it to you? It was my mother's, Camilla said, her fingers closing over the cool metal. It was the only thing she had left of her, a woman who had died when she was too young to form lasting memories. Can I see what's inside? It's stuck, Camilla explained gently. It hasn't been opened in years. My grandmother said the key was lost a long time ago. At that moment, Vincenzo appeared in the open doorway, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room. He had come to say goodnight to his son, but his eyes were fixed on the locket in her hand. Let me see that, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of its earlier warmth. It was a command. Hesitantly, Camilla held it out. He didn't take it. He simply stared, his body going rigid. A flicker of something crossed his face, not just recognition, but something colder, sharper, a look of dawning, horrified understanding. He looked from the locket to her face, his eyes suddenly dark, searching, as if seeing her for the very first time. Where did you get this? He demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. I told you it was my mother's, she said, her own voice trembling slightly at his sudden change. Her name was Elena Marino. The name seemed to strike him like a physical blow. He took a step back, his face a pale, unreadable mask. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode from the room, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Camilla was left standing there, her hand clutching the locket, a cold dread seeping into her bones. The warmth that had begun to grow between them vanished overnight. Vincenzo became distant, his conversations with her reverting to curt, formal instructions about Lucas's schedule. The security around the estate tightened, becoming almost suffocating. The guards watched her now with a new suspicion in their eyes. She was no longer just the nurse. She was an unknown quantity, a variable that had somehow broken the equation of their world. The mystery of the locket gnawed at her. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a key, not just a physical one, but a key to a past she didn't know, a past that was somehow dangerously intertwined with Vincenzo Morelli. Desperate for answers, she used the secure, untraceable phone Vincenzo had given her to call the care facility. Her grandmother's condition had its good days and bad. Camilla prayed this was a good day. Nonna, she said when the nurse connected her. It's me, Cammy. Cara mia, her grandmother's voice was a frail, papery whisper. Are you safe, child? I'm safe, Nonna. I wanted to ask you about Mama, about the locket she gave me. A long silence stretched down the line. When her grandmother spoke again, her voice was filled with a fear that transcended her dementia. The black orchid, she whispered, the name sounding like a curse. She should have never gone digging. The Morelli shadow is long, but the Navarro bite is poison. He warned her. They both did. Stay away from them, Camilla. Stay in the light. The line went quiet as a nurse took the phone, explaining that her grandmother was tired. But the words echoed in Camilla's head. The black orchid, the Morelli shadow, the Navarro bite. Her mother hadn't just been a simple woman. She had been involved in something that had gotten her killed. Armed with this terrifying new knowledge, she knew she couldn't wait for Vincenzo to come to her. That night, she marched to his study and entered without knocking. He was standing by the window, looking out into the darkness, a portrait of solitary power. We need to talk, she said, her voice shaking but firm. She held up the locket. You're going to tell me what this means. You're going to tell me how you knew my mother. Vincenzo turned slowly from the window. The anguish on his face was raw, unguarded. I didn't know her, he said, his voice heavy with a regret that seemed ancient. But my father did. And so did Marco Navarro. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the same chair she had sat in during their late-night talks. But this was not a conversation between friends. This was an excavation of a shared buried past. Your mother, Elena Marino, was a journalist, he began, his voice low and steady, as if recounting a painful history lesson. A brilliant, fearless investigative journalist who wrote under a pen name. The Black Orchid. 20 years ago, she was investigating the city's underworld. She got closer than anyone ever had to exposing the foundations of both my family's organization and the Navarros. He picked up a heavy crystal decanter, his hand unsteady for the first time since she'd met him. She uncovered evidence of a betrayal, a secret alliance between my father and Marco Navarro that led to the deaths of dozens of their own men. It was a secret they would kill to protect. They both warned her to stop. She refused. He paused, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes filled with a darkness that mirrored the night outside. The official report said your mother died in a car accident. A hit and run. It was no accident, Camila. The Navarros silenced her. The air left her lungs. The story of her life, the simple, tragic narrative of a car accident, was a lie. Her mother had been murdered. And this, she whispered, holding up the locket? What is this? We never knew what happened to her evidence. It vanished with her, Vincenzo said, his eyes fixed on the silver orchid. That locket, it's not just jewelry. My father spoke of it. It was her signature, but he always believed it was something more, a key, a hiding place, the evidence that could have destroyed Marco Navarro then, and could destroy his son Rico now. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her presence in this house was not a coincidence. It was a ghost returning, a destiny she had stumbled into in a dark alley. She was not just Lucas's nurse. She was the daughter of the woman who held the key to her employer's destruction and his enemy's salvation. The Navarros don't know who you are, Vincenzo continued, his voice urgent. But if they ever find out, if they ever realize what you hold in your hand, they won't just come for Lucas, they will come for you. And they will not stop until they have it. She was standing at the heart of the storm now, and she had to make a choice. Not just to stay or go, but to embrace the legacy of the mother she never knew, a legacy of dangerous truth, or to bury it forever and live a life of protected ignorance. The truth, once revealed, was a poison that seeped into every corner of her existence. The opulent rooms of the mansion no longer felt like a safe harbor, but a beautifully decorated prison, each shadow holding the ghost of her murdered mother. Every glance from Vincenzo was now layered with new, complicated meanings. Was he looking at her, Camila, or was he seeing Elena Marino's daughter, the keeper of a secret that could unravel his entire world? Her choice was clear, though it terrified her. She could not bury the past. Her mother had died for this truth, and to ignore it would be the ultimate betrayal. What's on it? She asked, her voice hollow in the grand study. The evidence. What is it? Everything, Vincenzo said, his voice grim. Financial records, sworn testimonies from men long dead, photographs, proof that Marco Navarro built his empire by systematically betraying and murdering his partners, including several of my father's most trusted capos. It was a massacre disguised as a gang war. He paused, his jaw tight. My father was complicit in the cover-up. He chose stability over justice. A decision that has haunted our family for a generation and given the Navarros the power they wield today. The weight of this history was suffocating. We have to use it, she said, a new steely resolve in her voice. We have to finish what she started. Vincenzo looked at her, a strange mix of admiration and dread in his eyes. It's not that simple, Camilla. To reveal this evidence is to declare all-out war. Rico Navarro is not his father. He is more volatile, more brutal. He will not hesitate to burn this entire city to the ground to protect his family's legacy. Lucas, his voice trailed off, the unspoken fear for his son hanging heavy between them. Then we do this your way, she conceded, her mind racing. But we do it. We find a way to get that locket open. And we use what's inside to dismantle them from the inside out. Just as she would have. The alliance between them was forged anew, no longer one of employer and employee, but of co-conspirators, bound by a shared, bloody history. They spent hours in the library, poring over old city archives and newspaper clippings from 20 years ago, searching for any clue, any mention of a key or a code connected to her mother. Their shared purpose brought a new, dangerous intimacy. They would work late into the night, the only light coming from a single desk lamp. Their heads bent close together over a faded document, his arm occasionally brushing hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with the secrets they were uncovering. The ghost of a smile returned to his face more often, but now it was a shared smile, one of understanding and mutual respect. The intensity of his gaze was no longer just assessing, it was protective, possessive, and at times, achingly tender. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Alvarez, seeing them working together, her curiosity finally outweighing her professional discretion, approached them one evening. "Forgive me, Mr. Morelli," she began, her hands clasped tightly, "but I remember Elena Marino. She came to this house once. A long time ago, she met with your father. She was brave, too brave." The housekeeper's eyes then fell on the locket on the table. "She said the orchid only blooms in the dark," she whispered, as if recalling a dream. "It blooms in the dark." The phrase echoed in Camilla's mind. Later that night, she examined the locket under the desk lamp. On a whim, she turned off the light, plunging the room into near-total darkness. And then she saw it. A faint, almost invisible phosphorescent dust filled the tiny, intricate grooves of the orchid's engraving. It wasn't a keyhole. It was a combination, a pattern that was only visible in the absence of light. With trembling fingers, she pressed the petals in the sequence that glowed. A tiny, near-silent click. The locket sprang open. Inside there was no microfilm, no hidden paper. There was only a tiny, intricately folded piece of metal, no bigger than her pinky nail. A custom-made USB drive, designed to look like part of the locket's hinge. The contents were more damning than they could have imagined. Not just financial records, but audio files, her mother's interviews, the voices of dead men telling their stories, and one voice that made Vincenzo's blood run cold, his own father, negotiating the terms of the cover-up with Marco Navarro. The Navarros, however, were growing impatient. The failed kidnapping had made them wary, but their sources inside the Morelli organization were feeding them information. They knew Vincenzo was spending an inordinate amount of time with the new nurse. They didn't know who she was, but she had become his focus, his distraction, his weakness. The attack came when she was at her most vulnerable. Vincenzo had been called away to an urgent meeting, a carefully orchestrated emergency, by the traitor in his ranks. Ramon and the bulk of the security team had gone with him, leaving a skeleton crew at the estate. It was a calculated risk, and the Navarros had been waiting for it. Camilla was in the walled garden with Lucas, enjoying the last rays of the afternoon sun. The attack was not a frontal assault. It was silent, insidious. A gas grenade arcing over the wall landed on the soft grass. Before she could even register what it was, a thick, sweet-smelling smoke filled the air. Her last conscious thought was of Lucas, as she shoved him behind a stone bench and tried to cover his face, her own lungs burning as the world dissolved into blackness. She woke to the gut-wrenching smell of stale cigar smoke and cheap perfume. Her head throbbed, a brutal drumbeat against her skull. She was tied to a chair, her wrists and ankles burning from the rough rope. The room was a dingy, windowless warehouse, a stark, terrifying contrast to the pristine elegance of the Morelli estate. Across from her, a man sat casually on the edge of a desk, polishing a gold-plated pistol. He was handsome in a cruel, predatory way, with slicked-back hair and eyes that were cold and empty. "So you're the little nurse who's got Vincenzo Morelli so tied up in knots," he said, his voice a mocking sneer. "Rico Navarro, it's a pleasure." He stood and circled her chair like a shark. "He's lost his edge since you came along, forgetting his enemies, getting soft." "Where is Lucas?" she demanded, her voice raspy. "The boy is fine, for now," Rico said dismissively. "He's my insurance. You, however, you are the prize. Vincenzo has turned the city upside down looking for you since he got back. He's offering a fortune for your safe return." He leaned in close, his foul breath washing over her. "But I don't want his money. I want what you have. The locket." Her heart stopped. They knew. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, her mind racing. Rico laughed, a short, ugly sound. Don't play dumb. Our source was very clear. The daughter of the Black Orchid showing up on his doorstep. It's too perfect. My father spent 20 years wondering where that evidence went. Give it to me, and maybe I'll let you and the boy live. The warehouse doors groaned open, and Vincenzo Morelli walked in, alone. He was unarmed, his hands held out to his sides. His face was a pale, rigid mask of fury, but his eyes, when they met hers, were filled with a terrifying, raw agony. Let them go, Rico, Vincenzo said, his voice dangerously calm. Vincenzo, so glad you could make it, Rico sneered, pressing the muzzle of his pistol against Camilla's temple. She flinched, the cold metal a shocking brand against her skin. The price is the locket, you know the one. Give it to me and your little family can walk out of here, refused the... And, well, I get to clean up my father's last loose end, Camilla's mind screamed. The locket with the USB drive was still at the estate, hidden. She had been a fool, wearing a replica while they worked on cracking the drive's encryption. The locket is gone, destroyed years ago, Vincenzo lied, his voice like ice. I don't believe you, Rico hissed. Then you have a problem, Vincenzo said, taking a slow step forward. Because you have nothing to gain by killing her, and you have everything to lose. You kill her, you kill the boy, and there is no corner of this earth where you can hide from me. It was a bluff, and they all knew it. Rico had all the power. I'm tired of this, Rico snarled. He cocked the pistol. Last chance, Vincenzo. Her life for the evidence. In that split second, Camilla saw the calculation in Vincenzo's eyes. He had walked in here alone, not because he was a fool, but because he was the diversion. Now, Vincenzo said, his voice barely a whisper, but it was enough. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Ramon and his men, who had rappelled silently onto the roof, crashed through the skylights, showering the floor with glass. Gunfire erupted, the deafening cracks echoing in the vast space. In the confusion, Vincenzo lunged, not at Rico, but at her, shielding her body with his own as bullets tore through the air. He worked at her ropes with a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere, his movements swift and sure. A searing pain shot through his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, but he didn't even flinch. Go, he grunted, shoving her toward a side door she hadn't seen. Get to the car, get Lucas. Rico, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage, saw them escaping. He raised his pistol, taking aim at Vincenzo's back. Without thinking, Camilla grabbed a heavy iron pipe from the floor and swung it with all her might, striking Rico's arm. The gun clattered to the floor. The distraction gave Ramon the opening he needed. In the ensuing struggle, Camilla scrambled out the side door into the cold night air, where one of the black SUVs was waiting, its engine roaring. Lucas was in the back, terrified but unharmed, bundled up by one of Vincenzo's men. Moments later, Vincenzo emerged from the warehouse, his shirt stained with blood, his face grim. He slid into the driver's seat, and the car sped away into the darkness, leaving the sounds of the battle behind. They drove in silence, the only sound the squeal of tires and Lucas's quiet sobs in the back. Camilla moved into the back seat, pulling the trembling boy into her arms, whispering reassurances as her own body shook with adrenaline and fear. They didn't go back to the estate. They went to a sleek, anonymous penthouse apartment overlooking the city, a safe house she never knew existed. Ramon was there, along with a doctor who quickly and efficiently stitched the wound in Vincenzo's shoulder. The traitor, they learned, had been dealt with. The Navarro organization, with Rico's capture, was in chaos, its power structure crumbling. After the doctor left and Lucas had cried himself to sleep in a guest room, Camilla found Vincenzo standing on the balcony, the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. She stood beside him, the silence between them comfortable, familiar. The storm had passed. You would have died for me, she said softly. It wasn't a question. He turned to face her, his expression raw and vulnerable in the moonlight. They say the Morelli family is cursed, he said, his voice a low murmur. That we are incapable of putting anyone before the business, before our power. He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was warm, steady. You have broken that curse, Camilla. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her palm. My world will always be dangerous, There will always be shadows. I cannot offer you a simple life. I can only offer you my life, all of it. He looked into her eyes, and she saw everything there, the ruthless Dawn, the loving father, the broken man, and the man who was willing to risk it all for her. The night we met, he continued, his voice barely a whisper, I told you that everyone has a price. I was wrong. Some people, some things, are priceless. He stepped closer, closing the small space between them. From now on, you're mine, he murmured, but the words were completely transformed. They were no longer a command of possession, a threat of ownership. They were a vow, a promise of devotion, a plea. Let me be yours. I already am, she whispered. And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion and fire, but one of profound, soul-deep relief. It was the taste of sanctuary after a long war, the feeling of a promise kept. The Navarro Empire had fallen, but in their world, a vacuum of power never stayed empty for long. New enemies would rise. New threats would emerge from the shadows. But as she stood there, wrapped in Vincenzo's arms, with the steady sound of Lucas's breathing coming from the other room, Camila Marino knew she was no longer just a waitress who had taken a wrong turn. She was home, ready to face whatever shadows came next, together. The Black Orchid's daughter had finally found her own place to bloom, not in the light, but in the protective, dangerous, and loving darkness of the Morelli world.